Throughout history, free thinkers have outraged the religious with their wacky ideas about the virtues of free speech, reason, and of course, eating babies. Now, God is dying, and it's time to dispose of his remains. From the pits of hell, Satan sends two puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment with Ali Rizvi and Armin Navabi.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi, and I'm joined by Armin Navabi, as always. And Armin is coming in today from Warsaw. He's in Poland. He's traveling there. Yeah, so you traveled there for a talk.
My connection is really choppy. I don't know if this is going to work out, but we'll see.
Let's hope it does. So, in any case, I wanted to get to our guest immediately today. So we're joined by Thomas Smith. So Thomas Smith is a sort of veteran podcaster in the atheist movement. He's the host of the popular Serious Inquiries Only podcast, which was formerly the Atheistically Speaking podcast. And he's known for his commentary on science, skepticism, atheism, critical thinking, politics. He pretty much covers the entire board of topics, and he does it very well. He's also previously hosted a podcast that I really liked. It was Thomas and the Bible. It was a smart, really witty podcast on the so-called good book, as we know, on the Bible, where he kind of scrutinizes it in a really entertaining and satirical way. So we'll get to it now. Thomas, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate you knowing T and the B. It's been a few years, but yeah, that was fun times.
Yeah, it has been, but it's kind of immortal.
Yeah, true. It's still up there.
Okay, so I just wanted to get to, so you've been in this for a long time. So I know that recently, and one of the reasons we were both actually very interested in having you on is because there has been a lot of, in the atheist movement, if there is such a thing still, there has been a lot of recent factionism, right? There have been some schisms, and some of that came up. You had your recent appearance at, well, not recent now, I guess almost 2 years ago, at the MythCon conference, where you had that quote unquote debate with Carl Benjamin, the sort of cultural, I guess, entertainer, commentator, whatever, who it was very controversial, and it got a lot of coverage all over the place. But that's actually just sort of one of the symptoms. But there's a bigger thing going on. What have your observations been like, having been part of the atheist movement for so long, and what you're witnessing nowadays?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, is it considered long? I guess I don't feel that internally, but now that I think about it, I guess because time just goes so fast the older you get, it's like, I guess 2010 is when I started T and the B, so it's 9 years of podcasting. But like I've never been particularly, I've done podcasts, but I don't consider myself like, I didn't start any groups, I don't run any organizations, I don't run any conferences, so I've always felt a little on the outside anyway. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. I thought a lot about the topic of the atheist movement. I actually did a talk last year in New Orleans where I really had to think a lot about it, because it feels like sometimes, and I'm sure you guys can relate to this, like the internet can make you feel really bad about certain things, like you can feel the certain people show up a lot and are persistent and they can crowd people out of any space. And it does start to feel like a cesspool of agitated, angry white dudes. Like that's what it starts to feel like sometimes. But then, and with the Carl Benjamin thing, that was a perfect example. I don't want really to be any part of anything like that. So if he were the spokesperson, or if that's the segment, if that's the crowd that atheism was, I wouldn't want to be in it at all. But when you look at polling numbers, the weird thing is like how liberal atheists actually are. Like I don't think that atheists as a whole in America, and anything I'm saying is going to be from an American lens. I don't have any expertise on atheism in any other country, but when you look at the polling numbers, they're actually really liberal, and atheists voted for Hillary and against Trump greater than like any other group, like except I think Jewish people is the only other like religion or segment of faith or whatever you'd want to divide it out. And that surprised me when I look into those numbers, because online oftentimes it feels like it's just a bunch of Ben Shapiro's who are on you all the time in a weird way. And I guess that's just the people who are active online are, skew a certain way. So
yeah. So I mean, well, first of all, I don't think it's just white dudes. I've seen it all over the place.
Yeah.
So one thing is that Armin and I are both from, like, we grew up in Muslim countries. So
Mhm.
just Armin and I actually grew up in Muslim majority countries. So
Right.
Armin is from Iran. He grew up from Iran. He was a religious fundamentalist for a long time. I grew up in Libya and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, and I only came to North America when I was 24.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, we have what I've seen is that's interesting is that we kind of, how you do Thomas in the Bible
Yeah.
and you criticize Christianity. We talk about Islam the same way,
Right.
and we find that really important, because the way that Islam works in Muslim majority countries is it's part of the constitution of virtually all of them,
Yeah.
right? It's imposed on us on a daily basis, and it's sort of like if you gave Trump dictatorial powers,
Right.
that's the kind of power it has.
Or Mike
And a
Pence,
lot of
maybe.
Yeah, or Mike Pence. Yeah, if you made him.
Yeah, and that's interesting. This is one of the reasons why this conversation is a little weird, because like I speaking as another white dude American, atheism is one thing to me, and of course it's going to be a totally different thing to you guys and to other people. And one thing that I have to remind myself, I got a little, I guess I haven't done as much atheism, theism, religion, debatey stuff for a long time now. And I have to remind myself that like I've lost interest in that. And I can talk about why personally I have lost interest in it. But of course there's going to be people coming out of religion every day in America. There's going to be people who were steeped in a toxic Mormonism or a toxic whatever it might be. I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses, that's the one. I remember interviewing a few Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's like, holy do you curse on your show?
Yeah, you can say whatever you
It's
want.
like, holy shit, like that. You're practically in a cult, and they come out of it. And there are people at all kinds of different stages. And I think, I guess I regret and I lament that there isn't what I see as like a healthy atheist movement for anyone who needs it where they are, but it feels that way to me. How does it feel to you guys? I mean, it's a,
Can I say,
Yeah, go ahead.
actually, I interviewed Carl as well after, and I interviewed, now that we're interviewing you, I'm getting the same feeling from both of you guys when it comes to talking about the atheist movement. You as you mentioned, you keep focusing on United States as if the United States is the center of the world. Talking about left and right. I mean, I kind of see why you say that, because or not just United States, like the UK, United States, because he's from UK, like the Western world, right? Yeah, I mean, the atheist movement is growing faster than ever, and this is not about whether people are for Hillary or for Trump. We're talking about atheism in Philippines, in Indonesia, in Egypt, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in Bangladesh. These are people that are. We're talking about people that their entire lives are governed by religion or influenced heavily by religion, and they're tired of it, and they're looking for a community. And political disagreements to a lot of these people are secondary, right?
Mhm.
When the gay rights movement becomes so popular and successful in the West, I know there's still a lot more to go, but still, like we had left wing gay people, right wing gay people, religious gay people, atheist gay people. But the thing that got them together was like, okay, it's not okay for people to mistreat us just because we're gay. And we have other disagreements, and that's fine, but we can still get together on this issue and make a difference. We try to normalize being gay. And I think atheists need to, be able to disagree with each other on other things while be able to put that aside when it comes to normalizing atheism. Like, at least a lot of us should be able to do that on a global scale.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything you just said. I think I would a little bit disagree with, at least from an American perspective, there being too many gay people on the right. That didn't really happen, because like if the thing you're agreeing on is gay people shouldn't be discriminated against, and the official policy of the right wing was they should be, then there weren't a whole lot of gay people on the right. But
Yeah, but even oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, let me
Finish.
just, yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if you cut, I know your connection's dodgy, Armin, but I said early on, like, I'm focused on the US. I mean, that's why I don't know what this conversation's going to look like, because that's my focus. And what happened with me is I started caring more about the political situation in the US than I did about religion or atheism in the US. But that's not to say that the way I think should be the whole world. I'm just saying, like, those are my priorities.
That's fair, and I think that's why a lot of times when we say things that people say that, oh, you're talking about stuff that shouldn't be said in this political climate.
Yeah.
And we're like, we are like, because they're looking at it from a much narrower scope. Like, we're like, which political climate are you talking about? Political climate in Iran and Saudi Arabia? Because, like, they keep looking at Muslims and Islam as a minority, as oppressed minority, where when we're talking about an authoritarian majority. When you refer to people as like, oh, these, what did you say originally? You said just agitated white dudes, right? Which I don't think it's a nice way to refer to any group of people. But maybe if you were living in an Islamic country, you would be referring to Muslims the same. Imagine like, oh, these angry, agitated Muslims, right? It kind of would sound less acceptable in your circles if you were talking about those. Like, we come the way
that is what they say there. They actually do. They like, oh, like these over there, the sort of secular liberals. That's what they refer to as the authoritarian.
So what I'm saying is that how frustrated you're feeling about some certain problematic figures in the atheist movement, quote unquote. We have that issue with people like showing up at your door and hacking you to death, or the government showing up at your door, or you losing your job, or or Indonesia getting 7-year prison sentence, right? This is the kind of environment we're dealing with. So when people tell us like, oh, maybe you should tone it down because Trump is president, we tell them to go fuck off. Like, that's like, they're too, like, they don't see the global thing that we're dealing with here.
I see where you're coming from, and like, I'm not. It is. I guess it's difficult in this day and age when any conversation people are having, because it's online, feels like it's about here and now. You know what I mean? And I guess I don't know how you solve that, because I 1,000,000% agree that if you are trying to be an atheist in one of these authoritarian Muslim countries where it's literally against the law and you could face death for it, like, you are in an entirely different situation than I'm in. I've never once said that atheism here applies anywhere. Like, it's just my focus is here. That's all I'm saying. And it's a little difficult though. Here's what I want to say though. With my experience being in this country, and again, the political situation, and by the way, the racial situation in this country is unique, and it's specific to here. And what I see when I say things like a bunch of agitated white dudes, that's because I have a history of being harassed for years by a bunch of agitated white dudes. It's just a statement of fact. It doesn't like, so like, if you want to talk about different circumstances, yes, those aren't the circumstances in these countries you're talking about, but it's my circumstances online, because we have something called white fragility in this country. And it's, you deal with it every day. My own family, is the kind of people who can't even hear the words Black Lives Matter without like arguing with it, like, so that's the reality I'm in. And I'm not trying to say that applies to you or people in another country, I guess.
So I actually think that that's fair, right? Because one of the advantages of having lived in that part of the world and then coming here and living in this part of the world is you realize where the power is.
Hmm.
So the way that, when you say the people who've been in power in those countries for a very long time are sort of these Islamic fundamentalist people, because they were, even when they were a minority, they just had a lot of power because they were able to organize. They're not
Yeah.
scared of death. They're fine with dying, right? So there's only a limited number of ways in which you can combat them. And the third thing is that they are able to use piety, a mixture of piety and fear, right, to instill, to manipulate people. So they'll say, "Oh yeah, if you don't agree with me, that's blasphemy. Now we can do to you what," and then the public is gonna, because the public is religious, they're gonna believe in, they're gonna feel that's justified because it's blasphemy. And you've had a similar kind of power thing. The people who've been in power here for the longest time are generally white men.
Yeah, I think
So
the far right
yeah,
conservative movement in this country is strikingly similar to that. They're a
right,
minority position that is able to exert all kinds of control on our politics.
right. So yeah, I get that.
So, but do you think it's fair to like refer to the? I mean, I know it's a statement of fact, but if you refer when you refer to people's races, it seems like we're suggesting that a race has something to do with the fact that they're being
It
agitated.
has
Or,
absolutely everything to do with the fact that they're being agitated.
No, but I think what Armin's saying is that it doesn't, that like the majority of white people, as you said, there were more people who voted for like they elected Obama, they elected Hillary. So there's at least 50%, or around plus minus of people who also happen to be sort of white. Even if you look at the polls, the white men, even if they're above the majority, it's not by a whole lot. There's still a huge amount of people who are not like that. So is it okay to say that? Isn't it? Wouldn't it be like saying, well, all Muslims are like this, or all white people like
I
this, or all
where
black
did
people?
my where did I say all anything? I just said
Yeah,
it.
no, no,
yeah, can I
you
can
didn't
I
say
say
all.
something? So,
Uh huh.
I mean, I don't. I think it's not fair to refer to people's races when we're criticizing them, like white, black, Arab or anything like that.
No, but
Do you think?
Armin, what if
Well,
it's
can I
connected
can
to
I
it, right?
finish? Can I finish?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I lose connection all the time. So when I have connection, I want to use it as much as I can. Um,
Connection
uh,
privilege.
so, yeah, but do you think because I think when people say refer to white people like that, do you think I have white fragility?
Maybe we're not on the same page on the definition of white fragility. I'm not sure what you mean.
So go,
How
yeah, go
how
ahead,
could you
define it.
have white fragility as not a white person? Maybe we have a definitional disagreement. White Fragility is a book that I highly recommend. It's on my shelf somewhere, and it's very specific to this country and to the racial situation in this country, and to years of Black people trying to get any modicum of justice and being resisted in the most fragile ways all the time. Now, it doesn't describe every white person, but it is very much a phenomenon among white Americans, and there's no intelligible way to talk about it otherwise.
Okay, do you think the thing that like the way Arabs, for example, treat Pakistani people and Filipino people in many places as inferior to them, right? Do you think it's fair for us to keep pointing out these racist Arabs, constantly mention the fact that they're Arabs, that this is an Arab thing? Like, do you think that's kind of might suggest that I'm trying to, even if I say, well, it's not all Arabs, but by referring to them as, constantly like putting the fact that this is an Arab
Let
thing,
me let
do
me
you think like,
let me ask you a hypothetical, just hypothetically. In the 1800s, do you think it would have been racist to say like white people have enslaved Black people in America? Do you think that's racist? I mean, this is a description of the racial
right?
dynamics that have
No, no,
happened.
no. It's fact. It's fact. But I said what you're saying. But I think when people fixate on a certain group of people, then I think there's a different motivation there. For example, if you look at, for example, Israel, right, as a country, right, you can criticize Israel just like you can criticize every country,
Mm-hmm.
right? But when I see, for example, a certain group of people, let's say within the Muslim community, that the mistakes by a country of Israel, foreign policy mistakes by Israel, grabs their attention a lot more than other countries. Even if, like, for example, China. China commits more oppression of Muslims than Israel.
I agree with this. I agree with this very
right.
much.
So when I see that they're completely fixing their attention only on Israel, like if they were, then it might, to me, it suggests that there's something else going on here. Not that they're not saying maybe statement of facts. They are saying statement of facts. But given that China's oppression of Muslims doesn't seem to bother them,
Yeah.
but Israel's treatment of Muslims does seem to bother them. To me,
I think there's a lot going on there. But I agree with you. I don't support the what is it, the BDS movement? Is that what it's called? Yeah, I don't support that.
Boycott, divestment sanctions.
Yeah, because of this very reason, because we don't do that with China, and so I totally agree with you there. I think there's a lot happening, and it's hard to talk in generalities about any of this stuff. We'd have to look at specific people and their motivations. But I guess trying to speak generally, I think that one valid reason to be more critical of Israel as an American is that we support them and they're an ally and we give them billions of dollars, and we might be more critical of people that
Pakistan as well. I mean,
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, Pakistan.
So I'm just saying versus China, like that's one, like we couldn't exert influence on Israeli politicians hypothetically if we decided we wanted to actually do that. Versus
that's a good example because not that many people complain about foreign aid to Pakistan as much as they do to Israel. Again, right?
Yeah.
So the reason why I bring this as an example is like, okay, so you mentioned the slave trade. Yeah, but it's a very fair thing to say that white people owned and traded black people, but so did the Arabs, so did the Romans.
Again, I'm speaking as an American. I cannot at all speak to the situation, the political and racial situation in other countries. I'm merely I've consumed a lot of information on the American racial situation, and I don't try to universalize it to any other country. I don't know what to tell you.
Okay, so
but you mentioned the 1800s. You were talking about the British Empire, weren't you?
I brought that as a comparison because you were trying to tell me that it's not right to bring up people's race to criticize them. I'm saying I use that as an example to say no. This is the situation in America. We have.
I was speaking to your example. Right? I was speaking to your example. Like I say, yeah, it's fair to say that in the 1800s, white people owned and sold black people. While it's also fair to say that the Arabs, when in your example you were focusing on America, you're focusing on the British Empire, right? And that's a fair thing to say, as long as people don't dismiss the fact that all Persians own people, black people own other black people, and that's also part of the fact.
So right? I think it comes down to, again, what I was saying earlier is a power dynamic, right? In Arab countries where I grew up, and I'm from a Pakistani family who grew up in Saudi Arabia. So yes, there was a definite class and racist difference that was actually official. I mean, it wasn't even sort of underground. It was actually out in the open. So I get that over here. It was, but Thomas, I think one of the things that causes some confusion, and to be fair to you here, is that when you look at something like, I want to get back to the Muslims and Islam. When you look at Muslims here in the U.S., where they're a minority, right, and they have very different character-wise.
Yep. And
you look at Muslims in Muslim majority countries, it's a completely different situation. For instance, over here, the Muslims are considered an oppressed. They're considered a minority that is being oppressed, say, in the Trump age. Let's take that.
Okay.
So, and it's part of the liberal conscience to protect minorities and protect minority rights, right? So when women over here, when they're in the Women's March to show solidarity with Muslims because Trump is calling for Muslim ban, they will wear the hijab to show solidarity. They did that in New Zealand too after the Christchurch attack. They'll put it on. But the same hijab in Iran and Saudi Arabia is forced onto women. Right. So over there in Iran, there's a big movement of taking off the hijab, burning it. Women are going to jail for the right to take off the hijab. There are women who've been fighting for 20 years, like Masih Alinejad, who wrote The Wind in My Hair, the Iranian activist. She's been on this podcast as well. She's leading this movement to fight against the hijab and what it stands for. They look at it as my wife says, they look at it as a Confederate flag, right? As a former, you have the right to wear it. Yes, go ahead and wear it. But, it has a history, and there's a reason that it was invented. and there's something that it stands for.
Yeah, it's
symbol.
interesting. Had the leader of New Zealand been male, like what would they have done to show the same solidarity? I
He would have
wonder.
gotten circumcised or grown a beard. No. But
I mean, to at least
sorry.
point, you know,
Yeah, I just want to. So what happens is that you have liberals in the Western world, which everybody looks to because they tend to have freedom of speech and they're able to say things for people who can't. And then you have liberals, secular liberals in places like the Muslim world, all the 51 Muslim majority countries in the world.
Yeah.
So what happens is that when we over here, when we talk about going out and we start defending certain things in the Quran, saying it's or glamorizing the hijab or wearing it in solidarity, to them, because they don't understand the dynamics, the power dynamics that we're discussing, specific to our locations, they tend to look at it as a slap in the face.
Yeah.
Because for them, they're a lot more aggressive, right? They the way they talk about Islam is much more aggressive than the way people do here, because respectful dialogue is a privilege of free and open societies, right? We can engage in it. We can say, let's be respectful and have a measured kind of conversation. But over there, when they have very little time or very few opportunities to actually speak out in a way that they can, there's a lot more anger and a lot more emotion and passion associated with it. So I think that causes some of the confusion. And a lot of people here in the atheist movement in the West tend to misread the kind of things that the atheists from the Muslim world are saying. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the issue of, the Prime Minister of New Zealand donning a hijab, that's like one of the most difficult, complicated things I could think of, because
oh yeah, I agree.
It means one thing to her and to the Muslims in New Zealand and something completely different to other people. Like it means showing solidarity with a persecuted minority in one context, and in another context is reinforcing awful gender like norm, what would you call it, gender almost rules, I guess. Yeah, oppression. Yeah. And I that's a tough thing. I think that it's, when the way you lay out the case, like I think that she probably shouldn't have done that. And like that, it is kind of, it's sacrificing a lot of people in order to try to save another group of people. You know what I mean? It's tough, but I don't look at it. But
I completely agree with you.
At the same time, you see people online in atheist, contexts saying horrible things about how she wants Sharia law. And it's like, obviously she doesn't, so it's hard. It's these conversations we're having, as has been a theme of this podcast, which is they apply in a certain context and not in another. And I agree with you that that probably causes a lot of harm when a leader of a country does that.
I think that both sides. Yeah, go ahead.
Here sometimes.
Yeah.
I do want to admit that we do have within our own atheist community, like we keep saying that, a lot of people call us racist or Nazis and it's unfair. But we do have to admit that we do have a lot of bigotry and racism in the atheist community. We do, and we need to call them out. Like a lot of people think, and we do call it out whenever we see it. Like within the Atheist Republic, for example, right after the New Zealand shooting, when we posted about it, we got a lot of comments supporting the shooter. Lots of comments supporting the shooter. And
that's horrible. That's a huge problem.
Yeah, and we instead of shying away from it, we shined a light on it, right? We called it out. That's bullshit. But the thing is that a lot of people, we don't dance around it. This is a big problem, and we don't pretend.
I wonder if I could ask you, Armin, why you think that was, because nothing I'm involved in had anybody cheering the shooting, and I would be shocked if it did. Like, why do you think that there would be people in that group who would do that? Because that's horrible.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I think we do is that one problem with censoring speech all the time is that these people are out there. There's a lot of them that are out there, and the fact that you're shocked about it is because we have created such safe spaces that people don't see these things and they don't know how big of a problem it is. And that's another problem I have with constantly censoring people.
I would
Because
beg
I
to
want
differ.
people-
I would beg to differ. I am shocked because I am shocked that your space online hasn't made clear that those people wouldn't be welcome.
Well, I mean, we okay, so we we have different environments, right? We have an area where these things are not welcome, but we also have an area where we want these people. It's not about being welcome. We don't want them. It's not, the thing is that we want to be able to call them out, bring attention to the fact that this is a huge thing, and also sometimes change some of their opinions, which we have. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of times when we remove these people, it's not like they're going to go home and all of a sudden change their opinion because now they don't have access to Atheist Republic, right? The thing is that a lot of people don't know how common these dangerous ideas are. We know it because we constantly see it.
Are you saying that you welcome people who are cheering a mass murder in your group because you would be able to change some of their minds? Is that what you're?
Welcome is a word that I wouldn't be using. Okay.
Because I would suggest counter to that hypothesis, because there is a hypothesis that, you know, like the sun is the best disinfectant. If you let the people out, then whatever. But like, I don't really think that's true. I think that there was a time when I might have even believed that. But I think what we see is when we allow these people out of the fringes of our society, and when they feel emboldened by somebody like Trump, again, to speak from the American context, what we see is not a bunch of people who start voicing their opinions and then they're shot down. They're like, oh, now I've changed my mind. What we see is more hate groups registered than ever. You know, like there's a rise of hate groups in the U.S. because the minute they feel
groups because they grew in darkness for a very long time.
I know. I'm suggesting it's the opposite.
There, Trump didn't create them. They were growing.
I don't think he created them, but he made it more okay. Like when you have a figure like that, it makes them feel more emboldened.
I'll just take this opportunity. I did I actually talked about this some time ago at the Muslimish conference. So I had this, if you're from the ex-Muslim community or if you're an atheist from the Muslim world, this is something that we've been aware of since, I think, 2013, 2014. Because in contrast to the rest of the atheist activists, something that happened with us was that I remember, so I was fairly prominent because I was writing for HuffPost. I had, a big online presence. And I started getting a lot of these supporters who would come in and they would, because I used to criticize Islam. I mean, that's my experience as an atheist, just like yours is with the Bible. So they would come in, they're like, yeah, you're right. I support you. I want all the Muslims out of the country too.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking, I'm like, wow, that's not what I'm talking about here. My whole family's Muslim. Everybody I grew up with is Muslim. So this is something that that I found, I started noticing around 2013, 2014. And then I thought, I'm like, well, what should I do with this? Do I let it be? Do I let these commenters stay? Or do I start getting rid of them? And I decided to let them stay, and I decided to let other people be exposed to it and fight it out. And they had these arguments. I just feel like it was inevitable. This kind of thing was going to happen. And I have a certain perspective on it too. But I think that this is something that people who are atheists or secular activists from the Muslim world have seen probably a lot more than the non-Muslim atheist activists, because they've wanted to sort of co-opt our message. Like, I got so many invitations to go on a lot of these right-wing shows. And,
I bet. I don't think that, I see what you're saying, and I don't know if there's a harder position to be in than being an ex-Muslim. Like, you get hate from every side, like you get hate from
it's its own thing.
Yeah.
That happens. Everybody has their own set of challenges. I'm just talking.
Yeah.
No,
but I mean, in this environment, because you get right-wing assholes who want to co-opt you, and you get people on the left who are fighting against you, saying you're too vocal against Islam. That's a tough position to be in. So I certainly can respect that. But like, there was 10 years ago, I might have believed the idea that like, no, we need to expose these people if they're out. But like, I just don't think the evidence has borne that out. Like, I think what works is not allowing these people to have a space where they thrive. And what doesn't work is emboldening them, you know, like giving them the space. They use it, they take that space, and they seize on it and grow, I think. And that's why we've seen it, because that theory would have suggested, I think, that like, oh, Trump is a release valve. So like all that hatred, you know, now that they've got Trump elected, it'll calm down a little bit because they feel, you know, they've restored their power. No, it just gets worse. You know, like it just makes it worse. I think we have to fight to keep those people.
I don't think he's a release valve as much as a symptom. So I mean, this was something that was happening. It was big enough. I think a lot of people ignored it. I mean, we've got block buttons, right? So people block people, and then they are just not exposed to things, and then it keeps going. And then when Trump wins, then it becomes everybody sort of, you know, they're shocked. They're like, "What happened?" So I actually think that
that's a huge conversation. A lot goes into Trump winning, and we could have a separate conversation.
I agree with you. That's a very complicated thing. But the way that I view it, and we had Steven Pinker on this podcast too, and we talked about this, is that he saw one common thing between the rise of Trump and the increased intensity of jihadism in the last like several years. ISIS is that, you know, every transformative change towards the future, a better future, is usually 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So I asked him, I said, is this a movement or a backlash? And the problem is when you see that there's a world that you're familiar with that's slipping away, as you said, I guess you know, the agitated white dudes, or in our part of the world, it was like these sort of religious extremists who always had a chokehold on the society. You know, when that happens, they see the world slipping away. They see their youth listening to Western music, or you know, doing their own thing, becoming more secular, engaging with other people online. Over here, you see that, you know, we elected a black president twice. You know, universities are getting more liberal, and so on. You know, when you see these changes, then the people who originally had that power, they tend to try and, you know, when people are about to die, they scream the loudest. So it's very, very intense. It's still not a majority, but it's very intense. So it's like in the throes of death. And when they do that, you get that 1 step back. So I don't look at it as a movement, the whole Trumpian thing. I look at it, or the jihadist thing, I look at it as a backlash, as a response to a world that is changing and it's moving forward. That's not to say that backlashes can't be devastating. I mean, we saw the whole Hitler thing was just a couple of decades, but it caused tremendous damage. But it's far behind now. Yes, I mean, there are neo-Nazis nowadays. They're trying to make a comeback and so on, but it's nothing like that. Stuff's not going to come back, right? So I kind of view it that way. I know there's a lot of reasons for the rise of Trump. I see the same kind of intensity with jihadism, but I feel that's kind of my perspective on it, which may be too optimistic, but
yeah. I can only speak about the American situation, and of course, as limited as any person is in that who's not an expert on the field. But
I was talking about that as well.
Yeah, I mean,
but
I wanted to just speak in generalities about the idea that, like, if you block people who are cheering on a massacre from your group, that somehow that's not the right thing to do. And I just strongly disagree with that. It is the right thing to do. We need to give these people no quarter. And that's when people respond to the feeling of having a social group that they feel like. I guarantee you that those people probably felt like that group would agree with them in some respect, at least some number of them, because, you know, like, that's why they're there. I think there's a reason that's why they're there.
Yeah, there is the kind of rhetoric that you're. I do think that, you know, for example, when they threw with social media platforms throwing off certain people, right? I mean, they banned the guy you debated, Sargon of Akkad.
Yeah, they banned Milo, and it was a good thing, and it helped.
I do like calling it deplatforming. I don't think it has anything to do with freedom of speech in any kind of legal sense. I mean, those people are still free to shout out from the rooftops or wherever they want to do it. But I just think that, and I saw this, I know that these people were not very vocal around the time they started speaking up on my pages.
Which people?
The same people, that sort of anti-Muslim, the people who started co-opting my message for their benefit. And I feel like it festered underground.
Well,
I feel like they were shunned publicly during the Obama years, and it festered underground.
I have to
And it,
disagree. It festered on Fox News. That's the issue. They still have a far right place to go, and they need to not have that. So, I mean, we can talk about the marginal difference that any one person's going to make. Like, obviously, any one, if you block this one person on your page, obviously that's not going to make or break anything. And that's just what it is to be a person in a society. Like, there's no one individual action often that you're going to take that's going to do it. But if these people didn't have these spaces, the safe space for those people is Fox News. It is garbage what they talk about on most of those shows. I mean, it's outright anti-Muslim bigotry all the time. And so that's their home base. And then they can kind of reach their tentacles out and see what else they can latch onto. And I think we need to chop that off. I think the less they have.
A lot of these people, and I can give you specific examples of people who initially followed me when we had so I've been doing this for a little over 10 years. I think I started writing for HuffPost around 2008, 2007, something like that. And so a lot of the people, even including individuals that I knew, people that I quoted in my book, they veered off to this sort of alt-right and far right thing, and they were all atheists. And I'm talking about hundreds of them.
That's what I just, sorry to cut in, but that's exactly what I was talking about at the beginning, because I had that same feeling too. And then you check the numbers and it's like, how is this possible? But it's just like this small group, I guess, because again, numbers wise, atheists are really liberal, but like somehow this focus.
I probably got a skewed version of it because I am from the ex-Muslim community.
Right, yeah,
so I guess more of those, a disproportionate amount of those would come and follow me in that sense, because that was a big issue. So what do you do now? I mean, now you have this problem of criticizing religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Religion also includes Islam, the Abrahamic religions, and so on. So you had this thing, Thomas in the Bible, which was again, I told you, a great podcast. Now you take that and supposing someone did that with the Quran, right? And you're criticizing.
They did. People did. Actually, a lot of people ripped off my podcast and did it with the other books. But that's okay. No hard feelings.
No, that's great. So they do this. When you criticize Islam, though, it's very different. So recently, there was, after this Christchurch thing, there were many people who were blaming new atheist activists like Richard Dawkins, like Sam Harris, for their rhetoric, right? I personally got that too. Some people thought that because of the stuff that I was talking about, that's what led to Christchurch. I got a lot of messages like that. I know Armin got a lot of that as well, because Armin has he's made some pretty provocative statements.
Yeah, we could talk about the spectrum of blame, and I would put you not as far up as I would put other people, if at all. I don't think you're to blame. I talked about it on my show. Go ahead.
No, I guess the question is, and go ahead. Do you think that the new atheists, a lot of these new atheists, do you feel like they are to blame for what happened at Christchurch?
Not really, not as much as you might think. I think that there are people who, when something like this happens, I think we all look at what's in front of us and what we can change. And I think a lot of liberal, progressive atheists see some of the crap Sam Harris says and others, and they say, this is it. And I agree to a certain extent that people like Sam Harris have stuff that they should apologize for and retract. But I do also think that people are a little bit losing the entire picture if the first person they're pointing at is Sam Harris or somebody like that. Like, we have a Fox News outrage anti-Muslim machine. We have far-right politicians in Australia and New Zealand. Like, there are people there stoking fears, who are much more immediately to blame. But where I looked at it was like, if you are someone who has made the reason I zoomed in on Sam Harris on this is I think you listened to the episode, but I'll just repeat it, is because one of the statements he made, and this was written in his book in 2006, was that France would become a Muslim majority country in 25 years. That's an insane statement. And he didn't, I don't think he offered a source. I think somebody asked him later, and I don't know what bullshit source he has, but someone pointed out, hey, it's been 13 years since 2006. And so you're halfway through your 25-year time frame and the population of Muslims is, I don't know, 6-8%. Like, it's just not, that just wasn't true. And so if you've made a statement that, like that it was A, not true, and B, was an awful lot like something that was cited in the killer's manifesto, this idea of the Islamification of Europe, and they're taking over our whatever, and they're breeding more. If those two circumstances are true, if you made a false statement and is cited in his manifesto in some way, I feel like you ought to make very clear where you stand and apologize and retract it.
So this is where I disagree with you. So I think that there are, I think that there are a lot of statements that we make, right, that other people who are very unsavory characters will also make, and they will be true, right? In this case, it wasn't true. It was a little overblown, the thing.
But that's why I made that clear. Like, if it's a true statement, I even said this in my podcast. If your statement is the sky is blue, and then the guy writes, he said the sky is blue, and so I'm killing people. Like, yeah, that's not your fault. Like, of course, you know. But it's that statement of Muslims taking over Europe and France, like, that was part of a package of bigoted misinformation that people were selling. You know,
so here's the thing. I think that the fear of Muslims taking over any Western country generally is overblown. I am probably aligned with you in that the far right populism, far right authoritarian populism is a much bigger threat. Like, in the sense that, you know, the Nazi founded party in Austria actually got 46% of the vote in the last elections. I mean,
wow,
Poland,
that's scary.
Happening. So there's a lot of Marine Le Pen was actually a serious candidate. So there are. I think that is probably a bigger issue, right, than Islam taking over Europe. But it has caused them a lot of problems. I mean, you understand why in 2014, 2015, with ISIS, all of those attacks, there were a lot of people who were very, very concerned about the rising Muslim population there. I think that it was overblown. I think it was paranoia. But where I stop short is I don't think that holds any responsibility. I think that's a conversation you can have when you have a refugee crisis. And again, I'm aligned with you on this. I don't agree with it, but I don't think that people who want to talk about immigration and how to handle it and how to do it smarter, right? And what are we going to do about the resources? What are we going to do about the response of our populations here with this influx of people? I think that that's a legitimate conversation to have that is not necessarily coming from a bigoted place. I think that, I mean, it's a conversation.
It really depends. It might come with a bunch of dog whistles to bigotry. It might come, like, you got to look at specifics.
And that's what I'm saying. I think that if you talk about somebody like Tommy Robinson saying it, then yes, I think it comes from a very different place.
Or Trump and everybody involved in the Trump administration, basically. I mean, right. they've shut off, like how many refugees were taken. Like, they've absolutely shut it off, and I think it's immoral.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. But if you talk about somebody like Sam Harris saying it compared to Tommy, I think that's a completely different thing.
It depends. So again, go ahead. I won't interrupt you. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there's an example of, for instance, you make this. One example I give is of Noam Chomsky, who I read a lot in my youth, right? And he had very, very aggressive criticisms of U.S. foreign policy. At one point, he literally said that the U.S. is the largest terrorist state, right? He said it because of its foreign policy misadventures across the world. But, a lot of his foreign policy critiques of the U.S. were completely on point. Now, on the other hand, you had Osama bin Laden, who cited Noam Chomsky in his speeches, right? He shared most of his views with Chomsky on U.S. foreign policy. He owned a few of his books, right? That was found when they found all of his books. He had some of Chomsky's books. And he used those ideas to justify terrorism against Americans, against innocent Americans.
Yeah.
Right. Now, the question is, do you say that Chomsky has some, and a lot of the stuff was not necessarily true. I mean, Chomsky does exaggerate a lot too. So do you say that Chomsky has any responsibility for terrorism against Americans? Do you say his views on U.S. foreign policy were not legitimate because bin Laden had the same ones? Or do you say
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say they were not legitimate because somebody bad might have the same ones. And that's not what I'm saying in this case. I'm saying the Sam Harris quote that I mentioned was very, I was very specific about that quote. That is bullshit, and it's harmful bullshit. And if there was something equivalent in Noam Chomsky's book, I'm not as familiar with Noam Chomsky, to be honest. So if there's outright lies, like if there's stuff that's inaccurate, and a quote like saying we're a terrorist state, like honestly, I don't know. Like, it wouldn't be the craziest. What would be the argument against him having some form of responsibility for when somebody attacks us? Like, he's labeled us, if he has, and I'm just going off of what you're giving me, if he has labeled us as a terrorist state and he's being cited in Osama bin Laden's work, like, what's the argument that his work isn't in some way responsible for that?
Well, I mean,
other than just like, yeah.
I wouldn't say responsible. I feel like
what's a good word for it? Because I agree with you. It's not responsible. It's like, and I agree. I totally agree. And I think the same thing applies to people like Sam Harris. It's not, he's not responsible, but like, yeah, he has stuff to apologize for, I guess, is what I'm saying with Sam Harris.
Oh yeah. I think that I don't even know about that. Like, there are many good ideas or even neutral ideas that have been used by people to do horrible things, that like the evolution was used by Hitler to justify everything that he did in the Holocaust, right? There's you supposing you did Thomas and the Bible, right? We kind of skewered the Bible and all of its contents, and someone goes out and has the same views about the Bible and then goes and kills. Christians where there are minorities, like in places like Pakistan, they're persecuted really, really badly. So someone does that. But would you hold?
Notice that nowhere did I cite Sam Harris's criticism of just things that are wrong in Islam, and that's what I don't hold him responsible for. If he's just criticizing tenets of Islam or the Quran, I didn't very purposefully do not group that together with repeating a racist lie about the Islamification of France. And I'll do you one better. I actually think what might even be more harmful when he talks about Sam Harris is his legitimizing Ben Shapiro, because people like Ben Shapiro, I think, have a lot more to apologize for in terms of this massacre. I think that he's far more Islamophobic in a harmful way. And Sam Harris has him on the show and says, like, we disagree, but let's talk about free will and God. Like, that's what we disagree on. Totally ignoring Ben Shapiro's awful racist comments, his transphobic comments, his anti-gay like all kinds of stuff that Sam gave his listeners access to. Sam has millions of listeners, and he has Ben Shapiro on his show. I think it was the live show they did, and he talks about how nice. Oh, yeah, we can talk. We disagree. It's no big deal. Whereas he can't say the same thing about Ezra Klein. What? That funnels your audience towards a certain thing, and
I don't want that. We'll get into the weeds too much with this, but I think his whole idea was that he felt like Ezra Klein engaged with him dishonestly, and whereas Ben Shapiro does it honestly. But I agree with you. Like, in terms of Ben Shapiro,
yeah, we all know Ben Shapiro is far more honest than Ezra Klein. Sure.
Yeah. So the stuff that I agree on with you is that I think that Ben Shapiro is it's sort of, he's an intellectual in the Trump age. There's a lot of people who become the threshold for intellectuals has sort of declined, has plummeted since the last 4 years. But in any case, I don't think that there's any problem with engaging with them. It comes to the same thing. You're talking about having millions of listeners. You're talking about giving somebody a platform. This is somebody who's very prominent. He has a lot of influence. Or someone like Jordan Peterson. He's a huge amount of influence, right? In terms of all of his speeches and the book and everything. So isn't it better for somebody to have him on and debate him and disagree with him openly and give counter narrative rather than?
That's just not what happens, though. That's what's been so frustrating. You're like, I was a huge Sam Harris fan. Like, I'm sure you know that if you followed me at all, I used to, like, I have his books. I used to just be a Sam Harris fan. But when you have, and Jordan Peterson was before, I think it was before Ben Shapiro and on the podcast, because I used to listen to every episode. And what happens is we get people who say generically, and this fucking grift happens all the time. It's, no, we need to have people on, challenge them. And then what happens is you have Jordan Peterson, who is a transphobe asshole who went on a whole tirade about not using pronouns, and then he brings him on the show and says, well, everything you say about that is right. Like he literally says in the first part of the show, everything you say about that is right. I'm not a legal expert, but yeah, wow, that Bill C-16, everything you say is right on that. Anyway, let's talk about, what did he talk about? It was like religion or... That's not getting them on and if you have a person, let me just hypothetical. You take somebody who has neo-Nazi views, and you be like, sunlight's the best disinfectant. Let's debate him. You bring him on the show. And you go, hi, love everything you do, but what about Keynesian economics versus what like? When you focus on that, you're not having a debate about the thing that they're for.
Yeah, so this is you're putting me in a really weird situation where I have to defend Jordan Peterson. Right? But I don't think the issue was when you said I completely agree with you on the trans pronouns. The position wasn't about the actual pronouns or using the pronouns against them.
Yeah,
the position was about forcing people to use that speech. Now, Peterson was completely misinformed about that. There's nothing that is going to criminalize him. Otherwise, he'd be in jail already. I mean, that bill that he talked about, C-16, has been in effect for a very long time now, and nothing's really happened. So it was overblown. But yes, if that was an issue where he was forced to use certain pronouns and otherwise be criminalized for it, that would be a problem. And I think that's a part that
he's a teacher at a public university. You have certain responsibilities when you're paid by the government to teach kids. And as you said, the bill C-16 was the federalized version, which was already in effect where he was. So nothing was going to change.
That's not the issue at that point.
But that's the issue. So now people gave me all these same arguments.
The issue wasn't just about, and this is, again, I have to defend Jordan Peterson here, which is
you really don't have to. You can just I'm not making you defend him. You can just be like, he's an asshole.
But I think that's important. Here's the thing. Here's why I think it's important. Okay, I think it's important to do this is because when we're not, one of the biggest complaints, so I'm leftist liberal. Okay, so I agree with you on most points. Right. One of the biggest problems I have is when we completely dismiss the other side and we don't look at exactly what they're saying. And I think that that's a problem. I think that if we immediately say, okay, we look at this, we're like, okay, Sam supported what Jordan Peterson said, so that's transphobic, and we just dismiss it like that. I think that's a problem, because then they will come back and they will point out to you that no, this is not about using pronouns, because Peterson has said if someone comes and asks me nice and says, can you call me she instead of he, I will do that. He said it, but he just doesn't want to be compelled to do it by law. And that was the issue. So I think that even though I completely agree with you on the principle, I think it's really important to frame what the conversation was and what the controversy was.
I would like to offer a counter hypothesis, which is that people try to frame things the best way possible for them. They try to frame, this happens all the time. And there's always this little bit of deniability. There's, oh no, he's just focused on a law that, by the way, didn't matter and was already in effect and wasn't going to do it. It's like, yes, but why? Why was he so focused on that? Why did he think it?
That part.
And then furthermore, Sam Harris had already had a quote where he said, he was bashing liberals because the hill we're going to die on is pronouns, like he has signaled to, and like, it might not matter to you until all of a sudden you're friends with a trans person and you see what it looks like when someone they follow is like, pronoun, who gives a shit about pronoun? And they're struggling to have their own identity in a society that hates them, in a society that leads them to commit suicide at a highest rate of like any other group. Like, it matters. And he is signaling that doesn't matter to him. And that's his right to do so. I am trying to say, don't make that mistake.
Yeah, so I don't want this whole thing to be just about Sam Harris, but I want to bring up again the same kind of point about framing this thing accurately as what it was. When you say the hill to die on, is that going to be about pronouns? There's a larger context that you're talking about. It's not that you have a problem with the pronouns. It's that while we were doing this whole thing, like while Obama was elected, then Obama got reelected by landslides, electoral landslides.
Yeah.
Considering the context of the current time, right? This was happening. Liberals became very, very complacent. and sat down. We thought, oh, okay, this is good. We elected the first black president. The world has changed. The U.S. has changed. We're moving forward. Everything else is history, right? And you became complacent, and you started moving on to things like
I
veganism
well,
or gender pronouns and things like that. And not that those things are not important conversations to have. The only problem is that when Trump got elected, then people realized, oh, that wasn't a transformational change. This was a fragile first step to a transformational change. And now we're back where we started. So now we have to regain our focus and go for the and start talking about the
I
big things.
disagree with your framing of how that went down. I do not
Yeah.
think it's a question of, okay, we've elected Obama, so we're complacent, and now we're going to move on to a fringe issue that nobody cares about. That's not really how I look at it. I 1,000,000% agree with you that liberal voters are too complacent, and they were complacent not in, I'll do you better, not just in
Not anymore,
2016,
but they
right?
were.
Well, we'll see. I'm already pessimistic for after if we vote someone in to replace Trump in 2020, I think it'll come back. I think we'll be complacent again in 2022. I'm very worried about it because we weren't just complacent in 2016. We were complacent in 2014. We were just good enough in 2012 to reelect Obama, but not Congress. Not swing the Congress back.
So
And in
what was the face of
2010,
that complacency?
what's that?
What was the face of that complacency?
So
What does
the
that look like? What was
complacency
it
in my mind, there's always here's the problem. Here's a dynamic, and this is a big topic, but here's what I think the issue is, and among many. The dynamic between the left and the right in this country is largely, not 100%, but largely between people with money and power who want to keep it and other people. Like the Republican, and we can obviously the money also tries to influence the left. I totally agree, and oftentimes they do. And there will be people who, in order to hang on to power, pretend to be liberals, but they really aren't because they just vote for moneyed interest. And all that aside, largely the right-wing ideology of, oh, the market's great, let the market handle everything, it's super great, we don't need any government intervention. That is a position that rich people and corporations want the world to have and want the country to have because it benefits them. Whereas, so big picture, the people who are more liberal are going to be the people, and the people who are voting for like policies that will help lift black people out of poverty, all that stuff, enfranchise black people, they're at a huge disadvantage because they're dealing with real life shit of not having the resources they need, living in communities riddled with crime and poverty. Like there is so much more that group has to contend with on a day-to-day basis that it's very difficult when they're trying to pay their bills, when they're trying to keep their children from being shot, to keep them focused on politics. It's very difficult. It is far easier from a position of comfort and wealth to motivate, to go vote, to go whatever. And so complacency, I think, is built into the system. And I almost wouldn't necessarily call it complacency. I would call it's an uphill battle for liberal causes, in my opinion. Now, I am absolutely flabbergasted. And also it's a dynamic that I think you guys touched on earlier, which is a motivated identity group like the Christian right is better at uniting and fighting and exerting a power above and beyond their numbers. And so what we saw,
religious fundamentalists everywhere.
Yeah. What the complacency is not that all of liberals moved on to fringe issues. I think there's a hardcore engaged liberal or segment of liberals who are going to be interested in these issues, but that didn't mean they were. I think that complacency is built. It's a systemic disadvantage for the side that is advocating for like workers' rights and for, racial justice and all that. It's going to be way harder to get a bunch of oppressed people to be able to organize and vote every year than it is for a bunch of wealthy, privileged people, because they just have the time, resources, and money and all that, so it's always an uphill battle. I don't think it's a result of focusing on trans issues. I just don't think that is the case.
Right. I just think that I don't think that was. But when all I'm saying is when again, I agree with you on the vast majority of that. I just don't think that I actually know when Sam Harris said, for instance, that, this is the hill that we're going to die on, trans pronouns. He wasn't specifically talking about the trans pronouns. He was talking about the kinds of issues that we should be focusing on if we want to come back, right? And that, because now we're talking about major things. We're talking about mainstream racism, mainstream.
But it's not about us focusing on stuff. I also want to make that point. You act sometimes as though the progressives get to drive this agenda at all times. These are responses to a white identity politics. Like conservatives share the same article from like 2010 when like a trans fighter knocks somebody out. That's not, if you look into it, it's not even really what they say it is. They share that for 10 years and they are on the attack for 10 years. And then people, or more, and then there are people on the left who want to say, stop being bigoted. Stop. Look at the problems trans people are facing. Please stop doing this. Their pronouns are okay. And they want to come to their defense. And then people like Sam Harris to say, oh, really? This is what we're going to die on? Imagine how that feels to trans people.
The secular jihadists have been made possible thanks to the Illuminati and the covert support of Israel and the CIA. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. If you like what we do, please support us. Share the podcast with your friends. Write and tweet us with topic and guest suggestions. Or head over to secularjihadist.com and give $1 or more for exclusive access to live video. Have your questions read and answered on the air, and more. Till next time, may the flying spaghetti monster be with you.